Welcome to episode 1 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast. And this is our first episode of... I'm dying.
It's starting off great.
Our first episode of X-Men Evolution. That was completely not intentional, and now it's awkward. I'm JC. This is my first time ever watching X-Men Evolution.
And I'm Rod. This is also my first time watching X-Men Evolution. And since we're doing this remotely, I'm drinking again, but I'm trying to do it slower, so I put it in. I'm going to try to do a straw.
Drinking with a straw gets you drunk quicker, Rod.
Oh, well, this is going to be a fun episode then, because
you inhale more oxygen as you sip with a straw, which actually gets you drunk quicker.
Ha! That's great. All right. That coupled with I don't have any sentimental ties to this show, it's going to be great. Anyway, Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single X-Men animated episode we can find, along with some bonus episodes. Our first series started with the original 1992 X-Men the animated series, building up to the release of X-Men 97 coming to Disney Plus later this year, or rumor has it later. But since it's not here yet, we needed to find some other shows to cover.
Yeah, by the time that this goes live, hopefully that rumor will be either confirmed or dispelled, but there is a chance that it's not coming out until 2024 right now. At least that's what something on Instagram and Twitter told us. So, some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that started over 20 years ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, come back. Normally, we would say we'll do our best to avoid mentioning anything from future episodes. Rod and I have not watched this basically ever, so that would be near impossible for us to do that at this point. We are currently not sponsored or affiliated with Marvel Animation, Disney, or Disney Plus in any way.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, make sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast services. If you want to support the show, we have affiliate links in all uploads too. We'll make sure to include links specifically for X-Men Evolution now that we've jumped to that series.
Now I would normally say on to the show, but let's just give quick thoughts going into this, Rod. Like, aside from seeing the different character designs, did you have any preconceived notions about X-Men Evolution?
Not at all, except I had seen like a lot of images of Rogue from the series.
Yeah.
But without context. So like I know that you'd mentioned before there were some memes or something, but like, I don't think I even saw those, or if I did, I didn't understand what they were.
Yeah, we're not at those episodes yet, but there are 2 shots that have made it like into like meme territory, where the girls from the series are recreating shots from Buffy and The Craft. And that's literally all I know.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I was in a Avengers versus X-Men video a couple years ago, and the girl who played our Rogue did the X-Men Evolution version of Rogue. So,
gotcha.
Yeah, aside from that, I didn't know that much. It maybe just that it was very high school focused as opposed to the Institute being the focus of it.
Yeah, I think it was either you or one of our guests, or maybe both of you guys, that had mentioned like this was all the X-Men in high school, or most of the X-Men in high school. And so I guess I went in with that, a little bit of that like expectation of like, okay, we're going to see like the younger versions of all these, especially, you know, digging a little bit, this version of Cyclops is very much what you guys described as the slim Scott.
Yeah, I think that insight came from our friend Kit, who's possibly going to appear on a future episode. So,
very cool.
Today, we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 1, titled Strategy X. It aired on November 4th of 2000 and currently sits at a 7.1 star rating on IMDb.
I'm trying to think, is that low or high? Or
it is lower than X-Men, the animated series, but for cartoons on IMDb, it's still a positive number, I would say.
Was this, as far as like mainstream goes, was this like a well-loved series, or was this like something people like loved after the fact as like a cult following?
You know, I have a hard time answering that because this came out when I was a senior in high school.
Same.
And I feel like the culture at the time was not welcoming to comic books and comic book fandom and stuff like that. So I think it literally was just, if people were watching it, they weren't talking about it at the time. And then I didn't really get back into comics and stuff until 2005. So this was already done, I believe, at that point, or at its very, very tail end. So
yeah, because I feel like, and this I might be like making this up from like pieced together memories and a little bit of stuff that's happening now. I feel like that it was so recent to the original animated series finishing, you know, because it was what, like maybe 4 or 5 years before that.
Yep.
That it was like not enough time to miss it, and especially the way it kind of like, as far as the network goes, like petered out from the original series, and then with like the weird release schedule and stuff. and then bring it back, it wasn't like a big triumphant return. 'Cause I don't remember there being a big hoopla about this, because I think I just heard about evolution gradually over time, you know, in like little bits and pieces and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. And same thing. I was finishing up high school and then going into college, and then like, you know, college through my first like 4 or 5 years out of college was like a blur. Just trying to get my shit together.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said of like, this was when a series would come out, there'd be a couple years off, and then another series would come out. It really was after Wolverine and the X-Men, which came after this one, that there's been a decade break for X-Men cartoons. It would just be a pause rather than like a full hiatus kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Things start off, and one thing that stands out about this show is it has a cold open format as opposed to, you know, X-Men the animated series, which would at most have a previously on, but always would go into the iconic song. Mm-hmm. So starts out with BHS, which we find out is Bayville High School, and we see a bunch of cheerleaders who are cheering for a touchdown. We see the quarterback who runs it in, and then, you know, the first X-Men we see is Jean, who gets really, really close to take photos of this touchdown.
I was gonna say, because like my note here is Jean is horny for a quarterback named Duncan.
Yep.
And then, you know, immediately after
she literally says it's for her personal collection.
Yeah, so I was like, okay. Which I guess if you want to think innocently of that, which I know is not my usual MO.
No, it is not your MO at all.
But if you do want to, because since these are high school students, if you want to think more innocently about it, it might just be like, I'm going to put it up in my locker kind of thing or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's probably what the intention was, because the people writing this were not writing it for, you know, pervs in their late 30s and early 40s.
Yeah.
So,
but with that image or that little scene of Scott kind of getting jealous of seeing that stuff, I was like, oh, so there's just setting up this alternate like version of the series that we know, are the characters that we know where Jean is with some other dude or whatever. But it doesn't really ever go anywhere after that. At least, you know, like.
So, I mean, I think that this is literally to lay the groundwork of them not yet being together. Okay. Whereas if we look at X-Men the animated series, they were together throughout that series.
Yeah.
They were like, they had already gone through the new relationship, the puppy love, and they're still high school kids. So for them, they, you know, we don't know the exact time frame, but as the two first members of Xavier's Institute, they've only been there at what, most a year or 2 years, maybe 3 if you're stretching it. Like they are literally still kids at this point.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that, because really the only adults that we see so far besides Xavier are like what, Storm and Wolverine or something.
Yeah, but yeah, as that happens, we see Scott is doing the quarter trick, which I don't know if that has a name, but I am forever perpetually impressed by people who can do that in real life. The
like
quarter's just flipping through the knuckles.
Yeah, it's funny because I have like, I mean, both of us probably have similar friends that are like either sleight of hand or magicians or both or something like that. And they're like, it's easy, you just do this. And there's something that sounds like a 4-year-old could do it, but I don't have the coordination.
Right. Or it's like that other thing of like, you have the pen in your hand and you just do the flip and it just goes around your thumb.
Yeah.
And I just throw pens across the room. It does not actually do what it's supposed to. So the touchdown is scored. As they're coming off the field, one of the players tells the quarterback that they see Talinsky is at it again.
I don't know that reference.
Okay. So the important part is Talinsky
Toad. That's right.
Is Toad. Yeah. That is not traditionally Toad's name, though.
Okay. I didn't... like, they mention a lot of last names in this show so far.
Yep.
And
so
I didn't recognize most of them.
So in the comics, his name is Mortimer Toynbee. So they just completely changed his name for this show.
It's funny because they picked a good set of introductions. You know, Scott and Jean, like we're used to them. Toad, he has like that high school kid energy. You know, we all knew that, like weird kid.
Oh, he was definitely the weird kid.
Yeah.
Whether or not he had the mutant powers, he was the weird kid.
Yeah. Well, that's was another thing that was funny. Was like I didn't realize till like halfway through the episode, I was like, oh, they're not even really sure he's a mutant. He's just weird and gross.
Right. You would think that like Scott or Jean would have a better like mutant radar, like just by being in the school and being familiar with mutants. Like he could have been spotted. You know?
Yeah. Especially Jean.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get in the next episode somebody who blends in a lot more. But like, I feel like kind of like the conversation we were having with Max No Sleeves, it's not quite like a skin versus a fur scenario like it is with Beast, but it's like, I don't know, his skin is not a normal natural color, I feel like.
Yeah, and then whenever he opened his mouth, it was always like green hued, like his tongue was green and stuff. So
right. The quarterback, Duncan, and the other player spy Toad picking a pocket, and he does it right behind a cop too. So he's like very much the high school I don't give a fuck kind of kid.
And then the football players ask the coach if they can take a break. I only played football a very short time in high school, and I
played it way longer than I did then.
Right. But I also didn't play like for like any team that mattered. Like it was never varsity or anything like that. But I don't know if you could just leave in the middle of a game, especially if you're like a quarterback. Like that's also like a really wild. I mean, it's a TV show, but it was a really wild like kind of suspension of disbelief. You know, like
that many players going at once. Yeah. I could see being the problem. But you also saw the coach looked up and they were just decimating the other team. Yeah. They would have had to like have 7 turnovers in a row that resulted in touchdowns or something for that to have mattered. I guess was the coach's perspective. He's like, yeah, you're murdering him. I don't care.
Yeah, that's why I saw him look back at the scoreboard. But I think maybe it's just my school. Like, you know, the coaches especially were always like, you could tell that they were the guys that didn't quite make it in high school or something, or to get past high school. So they were like living through their kids they're coaching. And so it was more about team spirit. Like, you got to be there when we win or something. Or I don't know, maybe he's just over it.
Right. Cyclops is still doing his coin trick, but he fumbles with it, drops it. And he says, oh, my money, or oh, my cash, or something like that. I was like, at most, that's $1 coin, dude. It's okay.
Yeah, right. But also, it's another one of the things, like, you could tell, like, some adults wrote this for kids. Because, like, I don't know any, like, teenager who would just say that. Oh, my money.
It's fair. But as that happens, he sees Toad's arm going through and grabbing somebody's wallet. Underneath the bleachers, you have the quarterback, who we find out his name is Duncan. And he just basically, like, pulls Toad down. And then we get his name. He calls him Toady for the first time. So if somebody wasn't sure who he was, it was pretty obvious at that point.
Yeah.
So Scott steps in, sees the 3 football players are holding Toad up, and says, look, we just put all the money back and nobody has to get hurt. We find out as the episode develops a little bit later that this had nothing to do with Scott knowing that he's a mutant or anything. It was literally just, oh, there's something weird going on. I'm investigating it because his buddy who he's with that we don't get a name for. I had no idea who that character was on the bleachers with Scott. Is like, should we call the cops? And Scott's like, no, I'll just look into it.
Yeah. Or maybe I took it as like maybe it was part of that early like investigation of the, you know, strange people in high school or something.
I mean, totally could be that, but at the least I didn't see it as Scott wasn't defending him because he knew he was a mutant, you know?
Yeah. And I was actually surprised that he was defending him. Not that I expected him to like kill him or anything, but I think it's just so hardwired for me, the villains and the heroes in the series. I'm like, oh, he sees Toad pickpocketing, he's gonna go like, you know, punch his throat. But he was like defending him from the football players. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, right. We're in a whole new universe.
Yeah, you got to remember, Scott yelling is not an across-the-board thing of all versions of Scott. There are some that are calmer. Our X-Men 92 version of Scott is very much yelling Scott.
Yeah.
So,
and also because this is the younger one, right? Too, that you guys had said it wasn't quite, you know, barrel-chested and aggressive all the time.
Yeah, he was more relaxed. He was calmer. He was definitely intimidated in a lot of cases too. Like he was not ready to fight everybody at that point. Like he would do the right thing, but he wasn't, you know, an aggressive Wolverine type character.
Yeah.
Duncan asks him why he cares, and Scott says, you know, I don't really love this whole 3-on-1 scenario.
Which is fair.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Duncan kind of ignores it, keeps going, tells Scott to not worry about it, gives the sunglasses at night joke, which I feel like over the years that joke is going to become just less and less relevant unless somebody does a remake or cover of that song to bring it back into the zeitgeist.
There was some TV show that vaguely mentioned it, and I can't remember what it was. I don't think it was Stranger Things.
Was it X-Men Evolution?
Yeah, right. No, there's something recently where there was like an asshole character, and it took place in the 80s, and they played like Sunglasses at Night, and they're like, I like this person. Was it I think it might have been the
Karate Kid?
Cobra Kai show.
I'd add that to the things that I have not watched that Joe Russo will get pissed about.
I do think it was that, because Johnny Lawrence was like, yeah, put Sunglasses at Night, and I don't know. So it still didn't really do what like the Kate Bush song did and stuff.
Right,
of course. Right. Like the Sunglasses at Night thing, I think like for anybody that that's not old enough to know that reference will just think like, oh yeah, it's weird that he's wearing sunglasses and when it's dark out. It's like, yeah.
Duncan tosses Toad, and then Scott gets up in Duncan's face and throws him into the other two football players, and Toad hops off like a frog. Scott has the worst mutant radar ever.
Yeah. They did a great job animating Toad. I will give them that. Actually,
from the motion perspective of it, it's fluid.
He looked like a frog. Like you tell, it almost looks like they traced over an actual frog. But also like the whole show.
This is not Disney animation, sir. They don't just trace stuff.
Right. But the whole show is like pretty well animated. It kind of reminded me of like an era of Scooby-Doo. Like the good ones, Of all shows to point out having great animation, Scooby-Doo would not have been the one I would go to. Yeah, I wish I knew I wish I was like our friend Scott that knew the eras better. There's an era in my head that was like animated kind of similar to this, just like the face shapes and stuff. It is because I know it's like a wide range. There's like everything Scooby-Doo, but
it's like, I think it's the one that's like What's New Scooby-Doo or something like that. Yeah, where it's like slightly more angular and not as realistic body builds and stuff. Yeah, I didn't watch those. Scott, hopefully you're listening to this and you can tell Rod and I were wrong.
Right.
So 2 of the players chase down Toad and they leave Duncan with Scott. And this whole time, I'm like, who is a mutant that's name is Duncan? Like, that's where my comic book brain starts to kick in, where I'm trying to figure out who he is. And he's not anybody. That's the funny thing. It's like, it's not like MCU shows where so many people are name drops and stuff like that. We actually get a fair amount of characters in these first 2 episodes that we're recording tonight that are literally just characters for this show. Yeah. Not mutants. They are just humans that are named humans, essentially. Yeah. Jean pops up, sees the fight breaking out, calls out to Scott, and of course, that's when Scott gets distracted. Duncan lets loose on Scott, and the glasses come off. And the optic blast just goes.
That was pretty wild because how far it reached, and also that it didn't kill anybody through the bleachers.
Oh, it definitely killed people. Let's be real. People are dead.
Yeah.
Body count on this show is much higher than episode 1 of X-Men 92. But yeah, shoots out throughout the entire underneath of the bleachers, throws Duncan, and then also hits the propane tank at the hot dog stand and just sets the whole thing up.
In my head, I kind of want to believe that he was so worried about the propane tank that he was looking at it when he blasted it, by accident. It's kind of like when you skid out on ice for the first time when you're younger and driving. You're like, oh no, the side of the road. Then you end up in the side of the road on the ditch. Because that was a really good aim because it hit that propane tank dead center.
Yeah. Yeah. If he was not focused on it, he wouldn't have hit it.
Yeah.
And that's where we cut to the intro.
Yo, this intro. This song was, I might use this as an example of peak Y2K hype music,
Right.
Like, I feel like drinking an energy drink and skateboarding and stuff. Like, it had like the orchestra hits and the guitar and stuff, but it's different than the original animated series.
92.
Yeah, 92. It's like less rock, but it's still rock, but it has like these sampled electronic elements to it and stuff. So it's like futuristic. Which fits the evolution theme.
Which on the plus side, you could co-post that to your stuff and ours on TikTok, Rod.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
The thing that stood out for me is it's not that it's a bad song by any means, but I can absolutely understand why, by comparison to 92, it is never brought up in the discussion.
Yeah. I even now I can't remember like the melody or anything.
And in the second episode, I hit skip intro. Like I was already past it. I'm like, yep, I listened to it once. I do like that they give like a full rundown of characters in kind of that very typical like 90s 2000 fashion where there are characters that are shown that are not in the episode. And then as we find out going into it chronologically, have not even been introduced yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I wasn't familiar with Spike, but I'm guessing we're going to meet him at some point.
Yeah.
And I did appreciate the introduction of the characters. It was hilarious to see like the font choice, like not even font. It was like the letter styling,
Right.
Because it's not even bad. It's just very much of its time because it's like metallic and everything. And I could see that like if this was a show you loved at that time, that whole aesthetic is probably very nostalgic now because it's so specific. Because there's stuff that we loved about the 92 series. It's like it's not technically good, it's just very what it is, and we had it was during a key part of our lives and stuff. So I was like, I kind of love this, but not in the way where I like lived it myself, I can just like recognize that this is like a really fond memory. If this was a lived experience for you, you know?
Yeah, we aren't looking at it and saying, oh, that doesn't work. It just doesn't have the same resonance because it wasn't our first one. It's kind of like how, our age group, so many people have the fondest memories of the NES and the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And then, we start to have conversations and somebody's like, oh yeah, my first system I ever played, not ever bought, but played, is a Nintendo 64. And it's like, oh my God, you missed some of the best stuff. Meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, the N64 was the first system I bought with my own money. So that differentiation is so dramatic.
I'm glad they did the intro like the way they did, because it's, like I said, it's very this came out in 2000, right? Like, so
this was end of 2000, so
that tracks.
Right. Back into the episode, Xavier pulls up, and I'm not a car guy. I'm not a car guy. Yeah. Was that basically like a golden Rolls Royce? Like,
I wasn't quite sure. I don't know cars very well.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things where I'm like, how rich is Xavier? There's a lot of stuff in all these shows.
1, mansion.
Yeah.
2, danger room.
Yeah.
3, this car. The only difference between this one and the previous Xavier from 92 is he doesn't have a hover chair.
Yeah, which was an interesting choice, because I kind of didn't really notice it too much until next episode we're going to cover. It actually becomes a thing, and I was like, what an interesting choice for a show called Evolution to be but I guess if they're younger, then it's not forward in time. I don't know. It's just thinking out loud. It was just interesting because we're so used to seeing Xavier with the hover chair.
But gotta remember too, there was an era of the comics in the 90s where he was in the hover chair, but he has gone from the classic wheelchair to the hover chair, back to wheelchair, etc. in the comics. So it could have just been what lined up at the time.
That, and I also was wondering, because our epiphany for graduation day in X-Men 92 about the public not knowing he's a mutant, I was like, okay, I'm just going to assume right now that he's keeping that cover in this show as well until they tell us otherwise, because maybe that's the thing. Just don't, I guess other than the gold Rolls Royce, don't stand out.
Yeah, but that's Westchester, New York, man.
Right.
That's just, I'm a rich white guy.
Yeah.
You go over, you see Jean is using her telepathy to move a bunch of the burning boards, picks up Scott's sunglasses, and Scott is kind of fetal position in the corner. I don't think we've seen trauma Scott before.
Yeah.
Aside from the flashbacks to when he was still in his orphanage in 92, this is a new thing for us to see Scott as the animated viewership,
Yeah. I took this as possibly the first time a situation has happened with him and his blast publicly,
or at the very least one that was this dramatic and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, because in the 92 series they showed him as a very small kid in an orphanage, and so I kind of took this as their version of that in high school, where it caused a big scene, but luckily not too many people saw it.
No, or maybe it was the big scene that was the first time he screwed up. Because I could see, Xavier, it's still established that Jean and Scott are the first 2 students of the academy. Mm-hmm. But maybe this is the first time since he joined that he had such a big mistake, too.
Yeah.
And we see Duncan on the field. Did you notice his helmet was cracked?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. Even the way, maybe I was reading into this, the way that they were pulling it off, I was like, is it stuck? I thought maybe something was broken on him. And then also to your point about him, is he a mutant? Are we going to discover something crazy about him right now?
Nope, just concussed.
Yeah, concussed, and he said he can't remember anything, and now I'm not quite sure if that was natural or one of the other mutants' doings.
So that goes right into the next part of the scene where a cop is kind of putting 2 and 2 together, and we get a very different version of Xavier, because Xavier point blank messes with this dude's mind, the cop, which is why I actually don't think Duncan, I think it was legit a concussion.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to see Xavier mess with a cop's mind, they wouldn't have had a problem showing Xavier messing with Duncan's mind too.
Yeah.
That's my theory, at least.
Yeah, totally. And the cop thing, that was so funny. He's like, yeah, well, whatever. It's so funny, how...
Oh, yeah, it was just a leaky tank, and I just heard Hank Hill getting pissed off in the background.
Yeah, right. Propane accessories.
No impressions. I'm not going to even attempt it.
Yeah. I also... So I think in I think it was this scene too. The actual series music kind of sounds like I forgot the guy's name already. I read it in the credits, but it sounded like he was trying to replicate a lot of Ron's stuff for the '92 series. It's like very similar, like then it shifted from that Y2K intro to like that kind of like rocky, bed under
right with a little bit of like those tension builds and stuff like that, right? But yeah, then we get Jean, who decides she's gonna go check on Duncan, as Scott is like looking on and being sad. Like he gets a little bit of a taste of what Wolverine got in '92.
Oh, that's kind of funny. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
No.
This one's called Duncan is Waiting for Me or something.
We're not going to do that. But yeah, Toad goes up and thanks him. And there's kind of like this awkward moment where Scott doesn't want to really associate with him, even though he was kind of doing the right thing. And it kind of gives you that like, I'll do the right thing, but I still want to be cool kind of vibe from Scott.
Yeah. But also that situation kind of broke his cool, by getting his ass handed to him by some jocks.
To be fair, that was Gene's fault.
Yeah.
Because he threw that dude down and was ready to go 3-on-1, and it was only because Gene said his name that he turned away. So
yeah, and this was with Toad after Scott leaves.
Yeah,
Toad he catches that fly or whatever.
Right.
And so another cool like animation moment. They made it very like frog like or whatever. But this was the first. I
would say Toad like, but yes.
Yeah, there you go. I wonder what the technical limitations were for the animation, because like the Lee Walds had talked about what happened in '92, and we obviously saw that stuff. This one I would actually say was like pretty pristine all the way up until this point, and it even wasn't that bad. It just suddenly got blurry. So I'm just like, I was wondering if there was some technical thing where they had to like zoom in, or the studio that they used, like physically like just punch the camera in, that they used on the animation itself. Or
that was just the design choice because they wanted to emphasize it too.
Yeah. It just looked strange because like the foreground was like a little bit blurry, but it wasn't even that bad. Like there was, by this point in the '92 series, there was like 20 of those. So it was like not even that. It was just like interesting. I was like, oh man, I just kind of curious now. Like if these guys like would do a production book or something that explained like these little curiosities of like what happened during animation.
Unfortunately, in my searches thus far, there is not a previously on the making of X-Men Evolution yet.
Right.
So they can get on that, but no, that does not exist for me to reference. So you see Storm is actually the one driving Xavier, and they mentioned that they have a train to catch. Did you have any predictions as to who it was going to be?
Only because the thumbnail for the episode spoiled it.
Oh, okay, fair.
And I figure like, well, it's probably gonna be him. Well, I figure it's either gonna be him or Kitty Pryde, because they tend to use Kitty as like the introduction character.
Yeah, having no preconceived notions, I was actually expecting it to be Kitty getting dropped off by her parents. That was what I was expecting.
Which is foreshadowing for the next episode if you want to see Kitty.
Spoiler, Rod. Spoiler. Also, the names of the episode give you no indication as to who the fucking characters are. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, and like this one kind of maybe made sense, Strategy X or whatever, because we're setting up the first episode. The next episode, I don't get it all, but we'll talk about that when that happens.
Yeah, and I'm trying my best to go into these with no preconceived notions, aside from what, I can't get away from writing down the names of the episodes in our planning doc and seeing where a guest might be a good fit for us on these. But I'm like, I have no idea what that name even means, Strategy X.
Yeah. I did like, though, that there's some random white kid walked off the train and Storm's like, is that Kurt? and Xavier's like, no, you'll know.
But also, it was like a random white kid, and if she knew his name is Kurt Wagner, like, I could have seen that kid being a German kid.
No, that's what I mean. Like, she's like, Kurt Wagner. Like, yeah, he's blonde haired and I think blue eyed and stuff like that. That tracks. It's but I also love that it was like the first kid that got off the
train. He's
train.
Literally German youth.
Yeah. It was like the first kid that got off the train. I was like, oh, this is going to be a long sequence of Storm just guessing wrong white kids getting off the train. Then there's something far more ominous that I kind of want to see what the interaction in the train was.
I want to see the entire trip.
Yeah.
Like he got across water, dude.
Yeah. in like a druid hood.
Yeah, it was like a more hardcore version of the monk outfit from the 92 series.
Yeah.
Like everything was covered and super dark and ominous and shit.
This one actually made sense from like I know realistic is like a weird term to use for these animated shows, but like we always joked about in the 92 series, like just put a hat and trench coat on, no one will be able to tell you're blue. And this one,
or Harry.
Or Harry. And this one, the way they dressed him was like, well, we are not seeing an inch of your person.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted like, well, actually, I mean, I'm sure you still had a show ID to get on a plane and stuff like that, but like, I mean, it was pre 9/11 era, so like,
yeah. You could do the romantic run up to the gate, you know?
Yeah, you could still run up to the gate and just be like, "Oh yeah, he feels sick."
Yeah.
So we see Kurt, but still fully covered. Jumps over to what I refer to as Cowboy Wolverine on the bike.
I was not ready for that voice,
dude. And here's the thing: I will not give shit to any voice actors. They have some of the hardest jobs, especially when it's to follow up with somebody who is such an iconic voice. We've talked about, Pride of the X-Men. We will be doing that as a special bonus episode. But this dude went from a historically infamous Wolverine voice to the iconic Wolverine voice, which is how I still hear that character when I read the comics every week, to, I guess, just not even generic, but just there,
same as you, like, it was not at all means bad. It was just the other voice is so hardwired in my brain. It's almost as if like you saw Kermit the Frog and just heard a completely different voice come out of it, It's that first time, you know what it is? It's that first time that you see Bugs Bunny after the original voice actor had to retire, and it was still a voice, still fits the image that is in front of me, but it is not the same, and that's where it throws you off, I did appreciate that whoever did the voice, or maybe this is the direction that they got, wasn't trying to impersonate the previous voice. So, because that would have been more off-putting, kind of like the last few episodes of Gambit in the 92 series. We're like, ooh, what is that?
Offensive Gambit?
Yeah. It was strange, but I appreciated they did it like the animation very cinematically, just like showing his jacket in his hand and walking in and stuff. Do people still say, because I remember this from the 90s, and I guess early 2000s, of like, if you're looking at a magazine or newspaper too long, the clerk being like, hey, you gonna buy that? Or it's like, I remember that all the time in real life, and I don't know if that's still a thing,
Dude, I am trying to think, aside from being at a comic book shop, which if you're there picking up comics, you're most likely buying something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the last time I've seen somebody pick up a magazine in public.
Oh. I can see that. I mean, I guess I run by Barnes & Noble every so often, and I see people out there, but I feel
like Barnes & Noble does not give a shit. They're just like, go buy coffee at Starbucks. We don't care.
Yeah, totally. Their whole idea is like the longer you're in there, the more of something you're going to buy.
Yeah.
Regardless. But
I would say that's accurate.
The magazine racks tend to be more specialized. Like, there are obviously still like the Rolling Stones and all the normal magazines and stuff, but I've noticed recently that it's a lot more. I think I saw something of like the Marvels Explained. It's a $15 issue of just like going through.
But that's like Entertainment Weekly who publishes those.
Yeah, but they're like one-off things.
Oh, yeah. No, I have the Marvel Universe Explained from Entertainment Weekly like around the time of Endgame. So, yeah.
But I don't, it's far less or maybe none of like what you're talking about with this month's, whatever, Entertainment Weekly or whatever.
But he sees the newspaper, sees that there was an explosion, which I did love because that kind of gave me a little bit of the magazine that published about the Guthrie explosion happening. Was that big enough news for this dude who is obviously not in Westchester? Like, is one explosion at a football game getting national news, especially if we don't have confirmed fatalities from it?
This is kind of dark, but
do it.
I think it's kind of true. This was in an era where school tragedies and I'm not even going to say the other word.
Yeah.
Were so rare that I think there was a chance it would end up on some sort of like, if not national, like at least a very large regional news thing,
Fair.
So like, but now, like fast forward to now, over Memorial Day weekend, I think there were 8 mass shootings, and the headline didn't even give them their own headlines. It just said 8. And tallied up all of the casualties and injuries and stuff. And I was like, that's where we are now, where it's so like normalized,
right?
That it's basically not news. I think we're a couple clicks away from just like not reporting it at all, because it's just expected, So like with the explosion at a football field, looking at it through like late 90s glasses or something, it's like that might have made news because it's so bizarre, that something like that would happen.
And if you're also taking in context of the rest of the episode, it seems like the X-Men are not a known quantity yet either. Because this is obviously, it is an internet world, but this is like AOL internet world. This is maybe one kid in the neighborhood has high speed at this point kind of scenario.
We'll put this into perspective. I went to college in the fall of 2001. The college I went to was Greenville University, and we were the first all-campus Wi-Fi in the nation.
Wow.
It was a small campus, and that's how we were able to do that. But 2001 is the first time that happened. So, like, the always-on internet thing, like, wasn't even, like, really... It wasn't actually happening until probably after I graduated, because I'm going to guess if our school was the first, then it probably didn't spread until a few years after that.
I mean, so I could tell you point blank, my college did not have Wi-Fi my freshman year anywhere on campus, not just in certain parts. Like, there was no reason to have a laptop if you had a desktop because you plugged it into your Ethernet cable in your room, and that was it.
And that's actually one of the reasons why we had campus-wide Wi-Fi. It's not even that it was like they were trying to be tech savvy or whatever. It was such an old campus because I think they were celebrating like their 100th year or something at that point.
So rewiring the buildings would have just demolished the infrastructure?
Well, they said that they did the estimates and it was like going to save them like half the cost or whatever to just get Wi-Fi routers installed instead of rerun cables. Then we were probably some of the first students that carried laptops everywhere. They issued us ThinkPads. That's how old we were, IBM ThinkPads. And I remember we carried those things around like cell phones. When I went home for the holidays, all my friends in Indiana were like, "It's so weird. Like, where are you carrying the laptop around?" And I was like, I just got used to it on campus. We carried it around like cell phones. I remember specifically...
You're like, it's my security blanket.
Kind of. This might be TMI, but I remember specifically like going to the restroom in the guys' dorms and just propping your laptop on top of the urinal while you're taking a piss because you didn't want to like log off your AOL Instant Messenger.
I was waiting to see what the end of that sentence was, and you did not disappoint. So Wolverine also asked the clerk for a bottle of water, and then the most nonchalant ever also gets water out of a glass bottle. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
And he just, with his claws, slices through, chugs it, and then tells the dude to recycle.
You know, as much as we said, like, it was a little uneasy hearing his voice, I like this cool Wolverine. Like,
yes.
He seems less of an asshole and more of, like, just a cool uncle.
Yeah. As you said, cool Wolverine, cool uncle is what came to mind for me for him. So I totally agree with you on that. And as he's leaving, we see he's being watched from the mountains nearby. And we see a very different version of Sabretooth than what we are used to.
Oh, yeah. And my note here is like, of course, Sabretooth is watching. An introduction to Wolverine.
I mean, you can't have one without the other. Let's be real.
I know, but it's just that intro, though. They're not even, like, waiting an episode.
So, you know, we talked about the Wolverine being, you know, pretty similar. He just has, like, the cowboy look to him. What'd you think of alternate Sabretooth?
There was a lot to take in. He was a lot more ornate than the one I'm used to. Actually, I can't even remember all of the design, but he was also very much more like slender. I have to keep in mind that everybody's younger. But there wasn't like a whole lot happening, so I guess I'm going to have to wait for more stuff. I know we get a little bit more of them, you know, in coming episodes and stuff, but like, I still don't feel like, even with the other episode we watched today, I don't feel like I get like a good grasp of like how he is just yet.
Fair.
But he was just like, there was a lot going on. I think this is my first impression.
Right.
A lot of flowing elements and stuff.
There was almost in the same way that like the late 90s was everybody was in pouches like on their outfit. This felt a little bit kind of like somebody went to a Hot Topic. What items could be hanging off of somebody's outfit? And that's kind of like what got attached to Sabretooth.
That's the flowy thing then, yeah.
Yeah.
And Hot Topic is a pretty good blanket statement for most of the kids in this show, I guess.
Aside from Scott. Scott was definitely an Abercrombie kid. And Jean. I would say the two of them. Yeah, they were Abercrombie American Eagle. So jump over to the mansion. Scott is rushing Jean to get ready. You get the impression that it's the next morning. So
right.
so that actually means that the news of the explosion, which happened the night prior, got into the morning edition of this paper. That's got to be at least a couple 100 miles away.
Yeah. That is a pretty fast.
That's actually pretty impressive for that time.
Because I mean, I don't even know if this is an expression anymore. That whole stop the presses thing. Because like if big news happened while like a newspaper was getting printed,
they would literally halt it and reprint stuff.
Yeah. It's like, wow, if that happened like, let's say like happened like 8 or 9 at night. for it to be ready for the next morning's delivery. Like, that's insane.
Right, because you start printing at like midnight or whatever for, your people to pick up the papers at 4:30 to start running into their drops.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right, I think you got our TikTok clip. Does anybody under the age of 30 have you ever heard "Stop the Presses"?
Right. And this scene also kind of jolted me into the reality. I hadn't realized that there was also the
mansion.
Institute.
Yeah,
the mansion and the institute separate from the high school. It's like, oh wait, so they all live at the mansion, then go to a different high school. Holy crap! Okay.
Right, because this is not the version that the school is a school. It is just where the gifted kids go.
Yeah, which must be interesting conversation at school.
I mean, I guess you just don't invite them over,
right? But I mean, like, you know how kids were. Like, someone would figure out something at some point.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what happens later in the series. Is they figure out like, wait, you all lived, all like 13 of you lived together. You know?
Yeah, when every day the same group of kids is riding in together, you start to put two and two together.
And it's all owned by one old bald guy. We have questions.
And those questions are incredibly offensive because it was the 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah.
So they get held up on their way out by Xavier, who wants to introduce them to Kurt. And Kurt is pretty hesitant to reveal himself.
Mm-hmm. You can tell that he has some trauma about how people react to him.
Yeah, and Xavier says something along the lines of like, it's okay. We all have our gifts, but not everybody's gift is always an asset. And it's just like the most like cocks his eyebrow at Scott being like, so we should talk.
Yeah. I was like, is now the time? We're compounding too many activities at once. Like, me the new kid and then scolding me.
But it was also like, I can't believe Xavier didn't give him shit last night.
Right.
Like, he waited until the next morning. So Scott's kind of like, did I get away with blowing up half the school?
Right. That's hilarious. I did have a note here. I appreciated Scott saying something that actually made sense for once. Or at least it's not that well,
it's not our Scott. That's why, Rob.
I'm so used to the other Cyclops. But he's like, come on, Professor. Like, I've got 2 bazookas behind these eyes. And I was like, that makes sense. Why would you send this child with, like, weapons of mass destruction attached to his head to, like, a public setting, and then be upset with him for, like, losing his glasses if that's the only protection,
But Xavier makes the point of, like, the whole reason you're here is you need to learn how to be more careful and have more control. So he got the life lesson. But then Xavier just kind of is like, all right, but you could also leave. And it's like, dude still did blow up the hot dog stand in part of his school.
Right. And also presumably murdered at least, a dozen people that were sitting in the bleachers.
Yeah. I love the fact that Xavier does not acknowledge that he messed with the cop's mind, though.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. He was actually there because Xavier said, how could I not know? It was all over the news.
Right.
So Scott and Jean don't know that he was actually there. Did he not? No, they didn't know he was there because he left to pick up the train. Yeah, okay.
Like, I don't want to say it's a sinister version of Xavier because I don't think it's that, but it is actually reminiscent of the comic book version of Xavier that I've mentioned in the show previously, where it's like he was more in the lines of gray versus on 92 where he's a little more black and white on the side of angels,
Yeah.
But then they also kind of calm down and chill and reveal Kurt's abilities, which is teleporting.
I think it's cool. I wonder if I was actually there, if that would be cool, or if I would just shit myself.
If it was a scenario where you didn't know that mutants were a thing, I think that's a reasonable response.
Yeah.
But this is the guy who has, like, the fucking laser blast coming out of his eyes next to the telepathic telekinetic,
Yeah. I just wonder if they had seen, like, someone who'd be able to, like, dematerialize, Like, that seems like a step from, like, what they're used to so far.
I don't know if I would say that dematerialization is that dramatic a difference from concussive blast out of somebody's eyes, but right. Agree. I think this is probably the best use of this phrase that I've heard in a long time. I think this is an actual agree to disagree scenario.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
From a world that we don't know because it doesn't exist.
Well, aside from that, but it's also like, oh no, it's 2 very different, very logical perspectives.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Most of the agree to disagree shit, one side is not logical. We jump over to the principal's office, which, when you saw the character, did you have any thoughts as to who it might be or anything, or did you think it was just a generic principal from a high school show kind of scenario?
Because of the way she was animated, I just assumed she was a villain because especially in the 90s, they had this way of... I know this is a 2000 show, but I'm presuming that the production was done in the 90s because it came out in 2000.
I mean, that at the very least, if this was going off in November, something started
Yeah.
the previous year. Yeah.
And so they just have this way of animating or drawing villains, because she had this very like, it was like a Bayonetta kind of look, you know.
I was going to say angular, but Bayonetta is
Yeah.
actually a very fitting description for it too.
Like villain. I didn't quite get exactly yet. The thing that really stood out to me in this scene though was I was like, Toad's soundtrack throughout the show so far has been 90s hip hop, which I thought was an interesting choice for him, and it kind of fits because some like the X-Men stuff have this like cool like rock thing going on, and he's got this very like doesn't give a fuck.
Right. He also always has like a little bit of that wise guy accent too.
Yeah.
Like
is
he's
that
always
a New York
like
accent.
I don't know if I would call it New York accent, but it very much feels like a person impersonating a gangster kind of thing.
Yeah. Because he's just like, what's it to you? You know, that kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And like has that like little bit of like a drawl or a slur to some of the stuff that he says. So
Yeah. Even in this scene, I wasn't completely sure because my note here actually says, "Oh, the principal's the demon." We find out it's more than that, but
right. The scene goes, and the principal wants to talk about Scott. Mentions the powers. Mentions wanting to know more. And Toad is kind of, as expected, like I don't know, like why would I care about this guy? What's it to you? Kind of scenario.
Yeah.
And then we see the principal transforms into what I refer to as a monster cat thing. And then you get the fake out cut to commercial of the mouth like attacking.
Yeah, getting ready to eat him or something.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. It's Mystique.
Yeah. So when she started transforming, I was like, oh, it's Mystique. Yep. No, that's something else.
Well, because it kind of had a little bit of like a Shadow King or like a Brood vibe to the design. But I was like, oh, transformation's got to be Mystique.
Yeah.
It's still so funny to me that years later, Mystique would start to become more of like an anti-hero character. Whereas in the 2000 like era, she was just a straight up villain. Like there were not really the shades of gray to Mystique as they are now.
Yeah, totally.
We see Kurt is brought into his room and he gets like this really dope boarding room that has like a really nice like stereo setup and stuff like that. I was like, okay, cool. The tuition for this school must take care of the layout to the room because he does not have that where he's from at home, it sounds like.
Yeah, he was very impressed by it. And I had two questions about this scene, not necessarily for you, but just in general. And one of them is just like probably just like a logistical oversight. The other one is kind of like an in-universe thing that we'll probably both have to keep tabs on since neither of us are familiar with the show. The first one is, now I'm confused about the timeline, because if this was overnight, did they just stay out all night talking, and he was just now introduced to his bedroom?
Nope, that's a logistical oversight. I would agree with you there.
And then the second thing is, Kurt mentions that his parents sent him here, and I was like, who are his parents? Because in the show that I know, he was just raised by a bunch of monks. You know?
Well, remember he was with the circus family before the monks.
So I guess you're assuming it's a circus family, then.
Yeah, I would say, because we don't know if they're going to carry on the story with his lineage like X-Men 92 did. At the very least, I would say this is likely that circus family that he learned how to do stuff from.
Yeah, and he's not religious yet, at least. We haven't seen him say anything out. We're like, not as much as other Kurt.
I mean, 92 Kurt is like full-fledged.
First.
Yeah.
I guess he had that hood thing, so besides hiding, that's where he got it from.
It's a solid spot. They sent him there. They couldn't expel the demons, and they're like, time to go to the United States.
Yeah. Where we send the demons?
Yeah.
You're going to New York.
Used to be Australia, then it became the United States. So Xavier has two gifts for him. The first one is a watch that he puts on, and it basically gives him a human appearance. So he becomes the skin.
Yes.
Quick note on that one. In the comics, the image inducer that would get used by Kurt at one point was actually created by Tony Stark.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Okay, so a ghost Tony is kind of in headcanon out there.
or Xavier just, was able to do it. I don't know how much, if any, this show crosses over with other Marvel properties, because we know that X-Men 92 is a part of the same shared universe as Spider-Man 94, the Fantastic Four show, the Iron Man show, all those shows from that mid-90s era. Those were all a loosely connected universe, whereas this, I don't know if it actually crosses over with anything else, so I guess we'll find out on that.
Yeah. That was another thing I was wondering is like, was this device just made for the show, or if it was from something else?
According to one of the fandom wikis, that it was a device similar in the comics that was created by Stark Industries.
Because like this device, like otherwise Nightcrawler just can't be in the show because all the kids are at high school,
right?
So I was like, oh, at the very least, this was a device so that he can like attend school with everybody else.
And then he opens a second box, and you see it already has an X uniform for him.
Mm-hmm. So he got inducted pretty quickly.
Back at the regular school, we see Scott is, trying to head over to lunch. Toad comes up to him, and when the coast is clear, Toad shows off his jumping skills. And again, I think to your point earlier of like the animation, it's like really smooth and fluid. And there was something about like that era of increased budget of animation that I think it just looked pretty. It really hit that amphibian style of movement and such. So
yeah, that also shows that anybody that has like longer hair, like I think there was like in the intro with Rogue, like the way her hair waves and stuff like that is a higher frame rate.
Oh, it was actually animated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Toad is basically being like, we got something in common. He grabs Cyclops' glasses, and Cyclops obviously is covering his eyes because he doesn't want to blast a hole through, a tank or a pipe in the wall probably and blow up more people in the school and murder them all. And Toad is basically being like, yeah, we should hang out. And Scott is not feeling it.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I'll think about it.
And meanwhile, like Toad is like drooling all over his glasses.
Yeah.
It's so gross.
So at least we know that it is not a toxic drool. Otherwise, Scott will be having a whole other set of problems.
Right. Toad is like a drug dealer selling his saliva like a hallucinogenic to other students.
It lets it harden into a resin, and then people snort it.
There you go.
God, we have the worst headcanons. Alarm goes off at the museum, and Xavier points out that somebody is using their powers out in the open. And this is the first time we see Cerebro in action. And then I love this joke because it only works in a show in this era and does not work today.
I was going to say, yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah. So Scott calls Xavier, and Xavier picks up. He's like, hello, Scott. And he's like, I hate it when you do that. I was like, oh, right. Caller ID was like a very rare thing.
Yeah, it was pretty nascent at that point. Like even getting calls on your cell phone, like you just knew it was a call. You didn't have somebody's name show up on it.
And now it's just like built in. And I've started seeing stuff where it actually just shows the name, even if it's not in your contacts.
Yeah.
Like it's whoever's registered to it.
Yeah, or it'll say maybe. That's always my favorite.
Yeah.
Yep. Xavier's like, yep, want to talk to you about one of the students that's near you. Scott's phrasing was interesting, where it was just like, I don't necessarily think I would want to share a room with him.
Yeah. He's like, how do I put this nicely?
Yeah. Like he's trying not to be a dick, but in essence ends up sounding like a bigger dick for it.
Yeah.
And Xavier says, we can't turn our backs on him. He just basically is like, keep an eye out. He's not looking for Scott to go into like full recruitment mode, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of verify like he's more than a gross kid.
Right. He's a gross kid with drug saliva.
Yeah.
We see Nightcrawler is asking about Cerebro, and we get the very standard Cerebro information dump just to get it out of the way. And I feel like that's one of those things where, kind of similar to Spider-Man's origin or Batman's parents getting killed. It's the same in every story. So all you have to do is just give like the 3-second version of it, and people are like, oh, okay, cool, I get it.
Yeah, it's like Batman's parents in Lego Batman. He just points at a picture. He's like, that thing happened. Okay. Yep. Anyway.
Exactly. Xavier puts out the call to Storm, who is in what looks like a greenhouse. It was
something, yeah.
But also kind of reminiscent of her attic room that was in X-Men 92, where it had like lots of plants and stuff like that. And basically says, need to have you run an audition, I believe was the exact phrasing on it.
Yeah. And also, once again, Storm's voice actor was perfectly fine. I'm just so not used to that voice. So it just sounds a little left of center to me.
It's just also not as dramatic because we talked about, even on our most recent episode with the Leewalds, you had literal Shakespearean actors doing the voices of the 92 cast. And even though we had multiple Storms in that, all of them were just dramatic and verbose with their reads. So
and this Storm's dialogue, like actual script dialogue, was far less condescending.
I mean, to be fair, our batches that we're recording these in, we're only doing 2, so we haven't gotten a lot of Storm yet.
Yeah, but in the first episode of 92, he's like, all of us are weirdos, Jubilee.
She also thought that Nightcrawler was a white kid, so
He technically was.
he was still a German guy. So
Yeah.
So it cuts to night. Toad shows up at the mansion, hops over the fence. Storm goes to the door, and we see her fly. And then we start to see like lightning and the clouds form, and then just start shooting lightning bolts at Toad.
I had nightmares of Halle Berry's awful dialogue at this moment.
Ironically, one of the wikis from fandom said that the Toad being blasted by the lightning was a reference to that scene from the movie. I don't know how true that is, but that's what the fandom says.
Yeah, because the movie came out this year too, right? And I think that came out during the summer.
I feel like that's a lot to try to get in there for...
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then it means someone from way higher up
Communicated shit.
made a bad decision, be like, this is very important to put in both things.
I don't know if I believe that.
Or it just maybe there's something else that was in like the collective consciousness that thought that this is a good idea to have Storm like blast Toad with lightning.
Or Marvel is just freaking out because they are so going out of business and bankrupt at that point that they're just like, they're like, synergy, do this. Yeah. Well, we'll find out, hopefully in the future. So Toad gets to the door and sees Nightcrawler, and then the way I phrase it is they basically have an accidental fight. They don't go there looking to fight, but just end up wrestling each other, basically.
Yeah, because Nightcrawler's kind of defending the mansion a little bit, right? Because someone broke in and stuff. And I really like their back and forth in this because it really, I know this is weird to say, but it felt like a genuine argument between two teenagers.
Right.
Because I feel like there's a lot of these shows, even when they're done well, it's like, oh, this is clearly written from like a screenplay point of view by like adults or whatever. And this was still that. But their back and forth really seemed like a couple of, kids in high school. They were just like, screw you, no, screw you, man. Like, your breath stinks. Like,
yeah, it was a lot of posturing too. Like they're going at each other, but they're not going for kill hits kind of thing because they're like we're just dumb kids.
And they're just being like mean to each other.
Right.
I think that's what I took away from it is like when they were like throwing stuff, yelling at each other, they were just being mean. It wasn't like, I don't know. It
wasn't hatred. It was just, I need to say something so you don't think I'm a wimp, so I'm going to go for like low hanging fruit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and then they're hopping through the hallways and stuff like that, and they totally demolish one hallway with like artwork and sculptures and shit like that. And then we actually got a little bit of a Disney reference years before the Disney acquisition. He called him Little Blue Wookie Boy.
Oh, I missed the Wookiee thing.
Yeah, when he called him that. Unless I heard it wrong, I'm pretty sure it said Little Blue Wookie Boy.
I mean, that makes sense because that was when the prequels were coming back out. So
yeah, timeline-wise, it was relevant again. Yeah, and they actually confirm, that he does have an X gene. So that's And
I love it took all that. They're like, yep, sky's blue.
Yep. I love that they try to zap him with lightning before confirming he has an X gene too.
The Storm is just like, I'm just gonna murder this high school kid.
I mean, to stand your ground work with lightning bolts, I'm not sure what the laws are on that. And again, this is before the public really seems to know what a mutant is, so there probably isn't the, Mutant Registration Act to worry about just yet. But Xavier stops the test, invites Toad to join, and then the fight continues, and they drop through the floor right into the danger room.
I love that we're seeing like an early Xavier who doesn't know how kids work.
Right.
And
because the Xavier we had in 92 only had Jubilee as a teenager. Like, all the rest of them had grown out of the bullshit. But this is like, oh, they're all in the shit. So even if Storm is an adult, it's you, Storm, and a bunch of like lunatic teenagers.
Yeah, Toad and Nightcrawler are fighting, and he's like, okay, test is over. You can wrap it up, guys. When does that ever worked on any teenage boys that have been fighting?
It's kind of like when you see the fights that get posted on like Instagram reels, and somebody sprays them with like water to try to get them to stop.
Right.
Like they're cats or something.
But it wouldn't be an introduction to an X-Men show if there wasn't an accidental getting trapped in the danger room scene.
Right.
This one was... I have questions about how this worked because they drop into the danger room and then Scott's like, oh no, they're in the danger room. And I forget, it was either Scott or Jean that was like, self-defense mechanism is on. It's like...
automated defenses, yeah.
For what? Well, for what? Like...
The dumbest robbers ever are the ones who break into the danger room, apparently.
So I was like, are they storing gold in the danger room? Like, what?
I don't know, but it is not happy. And I love you actually see them suiting up too.
Yeah.
Like Scott is literally pulling on his boots and like strapping them and shit like that.
So maybe that was a lost in translation kind of thing where like they were getting ready to go into the danger room and they had like armed it. So maybe the whole self-arming thing wasn't that it's just sitting there waiting for someone to go in and kill it. It's just that they had set it up for them to do something.
Or they could have been making out behind like a corner of the room and they were getting dressed up again. Or because they literally had somebody invading the mansion, they could be like, oh, we were in training, we got out of training, and now we have to go get changed. So he was already like suiting up for an actual practice or something.
Yeah.
You know? Who knows?
That makes sense.
But regardless,
I also appreciated how more practical this danger room seemed to be, because in the one we had seen in the 92 series, it was mostly just like holograms, and we just expected magic to work. This one was like, oh, there's like robots and shit coming out of the walls.
This was very reminiscent of the original comic version of the danger room, with just like various shit popping out of the walls trying to murder you.
Yeah, and like the toy that used to be for the Wolverine action figure.
Right.
Where it was like the thing coming out of the wall. And then as you'll see when we watch it, the Pride of the X-Men was a little bit more on that side. Although it combined the two. It was like practical stuff and then magic holograms.
I do love that they get into the control room and they put in an override. And there's still a 5-second shutdown for the override.
Right. And that it looked like Xavier might have been the only one that could override it.
Or at the very least, other people would have needed to say a certain code or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that room was really just set up to murder people.
Right? It always is. I think that's another thing. Like the Cerebro explanation, and people have to die in the danger room.
Right.
Anytime we reboot the X-Men.
Yeah. And then Nightcrawler thinks he kind of like has it figured out. And he's like, oh, this is just a training room. I'm going to unplug it. And then it just gets more murderous.
Which is actually pretty on par for Y2K technology. You know, like when you
oh, yeah, that's when my toaster tried to fucking kill me, Rod.
Yeah. If something was already like automated, just unhooking it from its data source wouldn't necessarily disarm it. It would just make it more unstable, you know? So
Yep. But lucky for Nightcrawler, Storm does pop in. She makes the save. And Toad is like, fuck this, and gets out of there.
Right. Which appropriate response.
Right. And they're like, yep, I guess he wasn't ready to be one of us. And Nightcrawler is really down on himself. Like, I don't think we did a great job of explaining it earlier, but this entire episode, Nightcrawler is very down on himself. And Scott's like, okay, well, I need to follow him because I don't want him to leave. Cut back to the upstairs, and Toad jumps out the window, like, just super clumsily. Which is kind of the Toad I know.
Yeah.
Ray Park is good at so many things. He was not a goofy, awkward Toad. Like, that's a part of Toad as a character that I've always loved in the comic book version of him, is kind of like sad sack, kind of awkward. Ray Park was too cool to be Toad.
I can see that, yeah.
But Wolverine is like, cool, guess I have to kill this thing.
Yeah. He just shows up. He's like, I saw the news.
Yep.
This must be what's happening.
Xavier's like, no, let him go. The big difference with this version of Wolverine compared to 92 is there's that instant respect from Wolverine that he literally just moves to the side and puts his arm out for Toe. There is not a, like, hesitation, are you sure, whatever. It's just like, okay. There's like a shrug and then listens to Xavier.
I'm kind of wondering, though, once we get to, like, the third or fourth season, if enough break-ins have happened where Wolverine's like, come on, dude, we're gonna kill something.
Just starts stabbing delivery men and such.
Right.
Nightcrawler finds himself in the hangar, and that's where, they start talking about the Blackbird. And I did like how they said, it's got 3 times the armament of the SR-71, which the only reason that one ever stands out to me is because of the band SR-71.
I was gonna say the band name.
Yeah, but IMDb has said that the actual SR-71 has no armaments on it.
Oh, so
yeah.
I guess that's still true.
I think it's just a supersonic plane that doesn't... I don't know if 3 times 0 is more than... Regardless, Scott invites him to the team. Nightcrawler is shocked by it. And Scott says, yeah, we all mess up. It happens. And he's like, well, I almost had you killed. And Scott's like, yeah, please don't do that again. Jump over to the high school the next morning. The principal is yelling at Toad for running away. And then the principal actually points out, he probably mind wiped you so you don't remember any of it. So
yeah, I didn't even think about that until that moment.
Regardless of if he got mind wiped or not, this Xavier, it isn't his first time messing with people's heads. Even if he didn't mind wipe Toad, he has done it in the episode, and it's known that he can do something like that.
And probably, too, young people because that's who he's auditioning
Right.
for the mansion.
And that's where we get a Mystique reveal. Toad is, out of the room. When they were zooming in on the school, when the yelling was happening, the bikes started shaking outside.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, it was subtle because it was also lining up with her yelling. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, that's a little dramatic that her shrieking is that bad. But
this is where I had written down like, oh, the demon was Mystique.
Right. So we get the full Mystique reveal with her very angular face. Kind of reminds me of almost as dramatic as Hades from Hercules.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
The shaking continues. We hear a voice. Did you know it was going to be Magneto, or did you think it was going to be Apocalypse?
I don't know how, but I maybe thought it was going to be Apocalypse for a split second.
Right.
But whoever did this voice, my note actually here was like, ooh, Magneto actually has a really cool voice. Mm-hmm. And just, I don't know, they did a good job of being like once I got past like the third word, I was like, oh, this is Magneto. And I don't know how I inferred that, but it felt like it. Yeah,
for me, it was literally not until the image, because the phrasing could have all still been Apocalypse to me at that point.
Oh, okay. I guess to me, it solidified once I saw the paperclip start flying.
Right,
like,
totally.
Yeah. I was like, okay, this is Magneto. But but then the face was a little weird. I guess we'll see him later on.
Right.
Just a reflection or whatever. But I was like, it was really like slim and like stretched out.
Yeah. It was kind of similar to the covers that the Age of Apocalypse artist did, where everybody was just a little more of that angular style and stuff like that. I'm not sure what the technical term, but it's almost like a little bit of the Mike Mignola, the guy who did Hellboy, where people are just out of proportion. They still look like themselves, but the proportions are different than a anatomically correct person would be.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of almost in a way like an Americanized version of like anime or something,
right? Which at that time makes sense.
Yeah,
because that's when we were really starting as a country. Geekdom was embracing anime at a there was a block of anime that would play on Cartoon Network at night, Toonami or something like that.
Yeah. And then, like that's when and this wasn't anime, but like when like Samurai Jack and stuff.
Yeah,
it's kind of that style, where it's like more you're getting the vibe than realism.
And then we get the quote to end the episode, which props to them, very similar to 92. It ends on like a dark moment, and not everything is just like hugs and puppies and stuff. Yeah. It's only the beginning.
So I don't think it was necessarily a perfect episode, but coming into this cold, it was more satisfying than I thought it'd be, from the point of like, I just thought I love the 92 show so much that I wasn't really going to be interested in this series. It was actually really fun. And even though I actually hated high school when I was in it, I'm old enough now that my nostalgia only remembers the stuff that I do miss about the 90s in high school. Mm-hmm. And this reminded me of those parts, like hanging out under the bleachers during a football game and like when you
were stealing people's wallets out of their pocket and such. Yeah. When you blew up the hot dog stand.
Right. No, for me it was like we were doing everything but watching the football game, and I was like, I appreciate that that's still like represented. Virtually, like very few people. Well, only a small, not only a percentage. I'm going to say small. A percentage of people cared about the actual football game, and there was maybe an equal amount of people like me who were just there to hang with friends, because it was one of the few times we like not be around our parents.
Yeah, you get away from your parents, and you have the freedom to just be around kids. But you're not in a classroom and stuff like that.
Yeah. So. And it was kind of exciting because we could like sneak away for a bonfire or something, or blow up a hot dog stand.
So many hot dog stands were blown up in the 2000s. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I went into this, aside from hearing lots of positive things from friends of ours who were in the geek space and stuff like that, that said, oh, you've never seen this before, I think you're going to really enjoy it. It reminded me of my favorite parts of certain shows. It has Buffy vibes to it. It has Can't Hardly Wait vibes to it. And yeah, there's like obviously going to be tension between some of the characters, but it's not like American Pie where it's everybody's just trying to fuck. It actually felt like, oh, the dude has a crush on this girl and it's awkward. It's not awkward because he's solely thinking about trying to have sex with her. So
yeah.
Any closing thoughts, Rod, before we wrap up this first episode of X-Men Evolution?
Just not that I wasn't looking forward to anything.
I know you're just sick of recording podcasts with me. That's the major issue.
Yeah. No, like with this show specifically, I wasn't sure. I wasn't like expecting one way or another. But now I'm like actually kind of interested in seeing what's going to happen with the characters and stuff. Like I'm kind of invested in like the story now, and I didn't know if I would be before starting it.
Thank you all for joining us. If you're just joining for the first time, you should have a full backlog of 68 episodes of X-Men 92 that you could also listen to. The final episode, Graduation Day, had the guests Eric and Julia Leewald, who were the story director, which is a modern day equivalent of a showrunner, along with one of the staff writers, Julia, Eric's wife. And yeah, that was awesome. And I still can't believe we had them on an episode of our weird, dumb, stupid show. If you have any thoughts on this episode, make sure to drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload, the official Instagram post, or the TikTok, which Rod has to clear a few TikToks up this week. And if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Rod, we're on to a new show.
Yeah, right. Let's see what happens in this teen drama.
Crushed it.